I'm Petrus, and welcome to WorldView. WorldView is a podcast where we explore everyone's perspectives on all things that can broaden our worldview. If you've watched some of our content so far and liked it, please consider liking this video, subscribing, and donating on Patreon. Today we're talking with Nick Koornhof. Nick has served for 27 years in Parliament, being a national representative through some of South Africa's most turbulent and interesting times. In his tenure, he has served as a member of numerous committees, such as the Constitutional Review Committee and the Committee of Finance. Nick, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Petrus.
We just want to know, because I've given a brief, intro on your 27 years of service in the Parliament, but could you perhaps just give us a brief rundown of your political career and what parties specifically you were involved on in the specific times?
Yes, Petrus, I was elected still in the old South Africa in 1987 for the constituency Swellendam. That was a rural constituency, and it was wonderful, to serve in the old South Africa. But obviously, we all know it was not a democratic parliament. And then in '89 there was another election. I participated in that, was re-elected and sent back to Parliament. And then everything started to change. P.W. Botha resigned. F.W. de Klerk was elected the new leader of the National Party. And, I was fortunate to be there in Parliament on the 2nd of February 1990. And, then the new South Africa was starting to dawn upon us. I was part of the Peace Secretariat. So I was a little bit involved, traveling to all corners of South Africa to see how South Africans respond to the challenge, to have a new constitution, or at that stage, an interim constitution. So I was fortunate to be re-elected in 1994 for the National Party. I served then in the first democratic elected parliament under the guidance and leadership of Nelson Mandela. What a privilege. And then I was removed from Parliament. I joined the Western Cape government, and I was MEC for education. And then at that stage, the new elections were coming up. And for me, it was important. There were too many, opposition parties. And my feeling at that stage was that we must cooperate as a national party. We had a new leader at that time. Remember, F.W. de Klerk, resigned. Martinez van Schalkwyk was elected. And, he was elected basically to close down the National Party, because there was no room for a party like the National Party in a new South Africa. But he had other ideas at that stage. And I convinced then the provincial cabinet to support me that we will work with at that stage, the Democratic Party, so that we can see whether we can definitely win the Western Cape and the Northern Cape. Well, unfortunately, the leadership in the National Party was against us and me at that stage. And then I had to take a very difficult decision to vacate and resign my position as MEC. That was not easy to do it, but I had to do it to focus, the minds of many people to see that, if we can't convince the National Party, to close down themselves, then the forces of elections must do it. And history will tell you that I then joined. I was invited by Tony Leon. I then joined the Democratic Party. I was out in the wilderness for a while, but then I was elected, on their list, and I became then the MEC for Health in the Western Cape. But 2 years later, less than 2 years later, in my statement, when I left the National Party, I had agreement with Tony that I will work towards a joint opposition. And as you know, the Democratic Alliance were formed. The National Party joined forces with the Democratic Party, and the DA, as today, it's history now what happened. There were one election during the municipal elections, and I think I have achieved what I want to achieve before the election. I had to do it on a very different way. and it was not easy leaving the National Party. It was my friends and my colleagues at that stage. But, I had to do it. I believed I did the right thing at that time. And then Martinez left the DA, broke up the DA, he joined the ANC, and the Western Cape government then fell. Tony returned me back to Parliament, and towards the end of that term, I was feeling, Nick, you are losing your honest energy in Parliament, in politics. So it's not time to do something else. Then I left Parliament. Maybe with hindsight, politics is in my blood. I think I made a mistake to leave, but I left. And for 5 years, I was completely out of politics. I went back to trying to be a lawyer. I started the Red River Network that was very active on HIV and AIDS. But nevertheless, I was out for 5 years. And then we had the turbulent times in the ANC. As President Zuma were elected, Thabo Mbeki were resigned at that time. And then suddenly, Mosia Lakota left. And you've seen, the start of COPE. I remember in November, I had a phone call from Mosia Lakota and said, Nick, what are you doing now? I said, well, I'm out of politics. He said, you must come and help me. And I contemplated that. And then I joined COPE. And what a journey it was, to be part of basically a party that could have been a new party for South Africa. And it was a fantastic time, to run up to the elections. I was elected, and then I served as COPE. COPE was destroyed. You want to ask me probably later about that. But COPE was destroyed because of a leadership battle between Mosia Lakota and Sam Salova. Nothing was left of that party. We all know the history. I think they've got 2 or 3 members in Parliament, or 1 now. So it was unfortunate. And towards the end of that term, the ANC approached COPE, and Tozamile Botha was my chief whip. And then the ANC offered 3 positions to COPE on their list. And they've just done the assessment of their members of Parliament. I was lucky to be on the top 3 list for COPE, and I was offered the position. Now, that was a difficult decision because, it's suddenly to tell your community, family, that you're joining the ANC. ANC was seen as the enemy. But I did that. I just felt I had to do it. White South Africans, especially Afrikaans-speaking South Africans, must be seen to join a dominant black party, that brought basically freedom to South Africa. I did it, but I never went into hiding. I remain in my community. I was still a member of the church council. I was very active in my community. I'm fortunate to have a little farm in Hoedspruit. I was very active in a very, very rural, maybe some people will say conservative area of South Africa, but I was embraced by them. So yes, that was my parties. That was my political career.
It's an extremely interesting political career, having been part of, I almost want to say, some of the most turbulent and formative times of South African politics. And then, of course, not being just, the opposition to that or fixed with one party during that time, but actually going with the flow in terms of how the different things changed. With regards to that and working towards the different parties, each with a new hope, the NP at the end of their political lifetime, the DA, which was a new hope at that point in time with the combination thereof, and of course COPE as the possible main opposition that's not just simply the DA as a classical opposition. It's all extremely involved in the political landscape at that point in time. But some people might see switching between the different parties as a type of political opportunism. I wanted to know, how much do you think is required or important that you don't necessarily always just try and be the opposition to whoever is in control, but that you sometimes might even have to work with them to achieve the goals that you would have normally in the opposition? Or rather, how would you respond to the criticism of political opportunism?
Well, I think it's fair criticism. Obviously, people don't like politicians, and they don't like politicians when they think they're opportunistic to join just for their own sake. I don't think I did that. I left the MEC position, and that is a prime position in anyone's political career. And then, I was just led, and I got that feeling, that I must eventually join the ANC. Politics were in a flux after 1994. Our
Right.
constitution allows us to join other parties. That was taken out of the constitution, but all proportional representation systems all over the world allows members of parliament to join. I'm very much in favor of that, because that's the only way. If your party goes off what they were telling the electorate during an election, if they go off, the only way you can resign, and many people don't have the means to resign. In terms of that clause in the Constitution, it was able to leave your party and to make a statement. But that is not possible. You remember at that time, I think Rolf Meyer left. He was the chief negotiator. He left. He formed UDM with Bantu Olomisa, and many others left. There were lots of people, the whole National Party, some of them left for the DA and some of them left for the ANC. So it was a little bit of time when it was done. But fair criticism, and I'm telling you, I've had it. I've had it from my friends. I've had it from my
I can
family.
imagine.
But I took it on the chin, and I think it was fair. But in the end, if I reflect, I think it was the right thing to do.
Okay. And in terms of coming to a new party with different ideas, especially if you're able to switch between them and embrace new ideas, how exactly do you deal when you're confronted with a different party mentality entirely than what you were used to? How do you do that adjustment period? Do you have to go with the flow? Do you have to learn everything? Or exactly how does integrating with a new party work?
Well, obviously I had a learning curve in COPE. COPE was called the sort of Coke Light or ANC Light, So yes, I had my fair share of debate. COPE was also, I came from a Christian Democratic valued party, briefly into the Democratic Party, who was liberal. I was never a liberal. And I don't think liberal parties got a problem in South Africa, unfortunately, to convince the majority to support it. But that's another debate. But social, I think I'm a social democrat. So COPE was a social democratic movement, and so is the ANC. You won't find it in the constitution of the ANC. The ANC do not pick sides with regard to social democracy or any other, liberal democracy like other parties do. But basically, I think it's a social democratic party. For me, it was easy to adapt. I think there's an open debate in the ANC, in their study groups. If you want to voice, you can open your voice, and they will entertain your opinion. In the end, if you lose it, unfortunately, you follow the party line. That's how politics work, not only for us, but for many other parties in parliament.
You also mentioned that it's important for white South Africans to be seen working with the ANC in terms of to achieve new goals. You said something quite similar in a recent News24 article where you said that white South Africans should play more collective role with fellow South Africans. Could you perhaps briefly explain what you mean by that in terms of, do you feel that it is partly white people's responsibility that our other communities in South Africa was not able to achieve as much as they could have?
Well, the white community is a minority. And unfortunately, they were in control during apartheid. So if you can't be in control, and there was no ways that the white minority will ever be in control again. So if you can't be in control, you must try to be influential. And the way you do it, you can either join the party and you do it through party structures, or you work together, outside the party and see what you can do to make South Africa, a better place. My plea, that was in fact my last speech in Parliament, but my plea at that time was that South Africans were drifting away in their own little WhatsApp groups. They were drifting away. In South Africa, if you only listen to Radio Sonder Grense, and if you're only watching CakeNet, and if you're only going on ski holidays, and you're only going to shopping centers and restaurants in white controlled suburbs, you can still think you're in a majority.
Yeah.
And sometimes they think that it's possible to win and to control South Africa again. That's over. It will never, ever again happen again. So my feeling is that especially white Afrikaners were drifting to be too negative. They were becoming too right-wing. They were, really whipping emotions up, in terms of their little WhatsApp groups. And they were drifting, as someone that is not making a difference. AfriForum maybe, is proving that if you work together and if you're positive and if you start looking at things you can do to make it better for your community, it can work. But at this stage, AfriForum is not a political party. So my plea in that speech was that it is time. I called it the Mandela moment for Afrikaners. It was their time to give at least one of their votes to Ramaphosa, to show goodwill from my community towards Ramaphosa, not necessarily the ANC, because I realize that will be difficult to do, but to do it for Ramaphosa. Well, and history will tell you, it was the most white votes ever given on the national ballot for the ANC during that election. So I think there was a little bit of a feeling. There was a history towards that. And I think my community was really trying to give Ramaphosa a chance.
Yeah, definitely. He was reported by a lot of moderates in all political parties as a type of a new hope for South Africa in terms of a moderate government-controlled parliament or cabinet, rather. So, he's been in power for a couple of years now. There was a ton of expectations, obviously, being the new hope from a lot of different people in South Africa. Do you feel like he's lived up to the expectations given the constraints or difficulty that he has? Or is he generally seen as a disappointment in your political perspective?
Yeah, well, he took over during a very difficult time towards the last term of President Zuma. He was sort of forced out, and resigned. And then he made the fantastic Tumamina speech. And, he picked up South Africans out of that black hole of depression. And there was suddenly hope in South Africa after that speech. Everybody is Ramaphosa. It was just time to be in parliament, and suddenly you were proud of your president. So, yes, and then the election came. I think I was expecting a little bit more from Ramaphosa. I must say it was difficult for him trying to keep control within the ANC. It was a formidable camp against him at Nasrec. He won with not many votes, and it was a hard contested battle. He got the wrong Secretary General voted in at that party. So it was making very difficult for him. So he had to calm down the party and run a messed up government or South Africa that he inherited. Now, many people say he was the deputy president. Deputy presidents play different roles all over the world, even in this country. And he was also putting his eyes on the presidency. So he was not there to rock the boat so that he don't get the votes at Nasrec. So it was a difficult time for him to be deputy president. Yes, I would like Ramaphosa to be, normally presidents do not micromanage. Yeah. But I would have loved him to micromanage a little bit more in South Africa. It's sad that our schooling system is not working after so many years. That's inexcusable. And I would have loved him to micromanage that and make absolutely sure schools are working. There's no excuse for that. There is no excuse that local governments do not work. And I would have loved to see Ramaphosa micromanage that and make absolutely sure that local governments get back on track and works. And, so that is definitely criticism for me. I think finances in South Africa is very important. If he says something and Tutu Mbeni backs him up, I don't want any one of his cabinet ministers or anyone within the ANC, especially the SG, to talk different, and then if they do, he must be strong. He must act like a leader. So yes, I was expecting a little bit more. Maybe I will see that, I'm an optimist, but I think on certain aspects he can do better.
Okay. Do you think that starting at the beginning of his term, he basically just, when people had expectations of him, because I feel like the general consensus is people expect a little bit more. Do you think that perhaps at the start of his term, he first had to consolidate his position within the party due to the extremely contentious position that he was in when he was voted in? And that's why he wasn't able to achieve, and that to the later part of his terms, we'll be able to see more progress? Is that type of a realistic expectation?
Yeah, well, that's politics.
Right.
You cannot lead, you cannot be the leader if you don't have the control. If you don't control the NEC of the ANC, you're in trouble. If your cabinet is really not behind you, you're in trouble. Never ever the caucus of the ANC was in a strong position, but they emerged to play a role when we've seen the caucus telling President Zuma, if you don't resign by this afternoon, we will vote against you in Parliament. So suddenly the caucus in Parliament becomes important. So it was important for the President Ramaphosa to trying to get most of them to support him. I think he was successful. I think he was successful. There is still those battles, and we will still see them. But I think he was fairly successful, and hopefully the NPA will a little bit assist him, to get rid of some of those implicated members of his leadership.
Right. Yeah. I mean, given your extremely interesting time in Parliament, do you perhaps have some notable moments or stories to share from the inside? For example, I know that you were in Parliament during the time of the vote of no confidence for President Zuma. Did you vote against him, and what was the reaction like afterwards? The rumor is that he was furious. Is that true?
Yeah, well, let me start with that one. He was not in Parliament, that day. So I cannot see. So I cannot. Obviously, I think he was not happy, but nevertheless, he was not leaving Parliament, storming out of Parliament. He was not there during the vote. Yes, I had fantastic moments in my career. I think 2nd of February to sit there and listen to FW de Klerk was a momentous moment for any South African. To be there. I think to serve under the new democratic parliament in 1994 was also fantastic. But another fantastic thing was really, I was behind the scenes trying to convince the then Speaker Mbete to allow a secret ballot, for us in Parliament. And it was touch and go. And I must commend her that eventually she took the decision. I don't think the President Zuma was happy with her, but she took the decision to allow a secret ballot. And that was a fantastic moment in Parliament. It happened. Everybody was quiet. Everybody was getting to the ballot boxes. It was quiet. There were no riots in Parliament. Basically outside Parliament, South Africans were quiet. There were there were nothing happening during that time. And for me, it was a fantastic feeling to do that and to participate there. And obviously, yes, I voted against President Zuma for that election. And, for me, it was, it's never easy to break, the line of your party. It doesn't matter. But, in this case, it was important for me to make, that statement.
There's also a couple of different cases where your constituency specifically is heavily against some of the policies that the ANC are currently, arguing about, or not arguing about, rather, working with other parties to get a compromise for. One of these is, of course, expropriation without compensation as one of the most hotly debated topics or points of contention within the ANC and specifically the EFF and other parties as well. What exactly is your opinion of that bill, of the various bills, actually the constitutional bill and the other bills?
Well, let me say expropriation without compensation become a little bit of a loaded political
Right.
statement.
Right.
And, I think let's focus on the expropriation bill that will soon go to the committee and then will go eventually to parliament. If you listen to Professor Elmine du Plessis, she is fairly happy with that bill. Now all governments do have expropriation legislation. We've had it. We've misused it during apartheid. In South Africa, all governments must have it. So we're not unique to have an
Right.
expropriation bill. The good thing about that bill is that we're not talking about expropriation without compensation. We're talking about expropriation where you can expropriate with a null value. Now, the legal meaning of that is if you're not happy with that null value, you can now go to court. Now, obviously, people say it becomes expensive to go to courts, but there are so many, civil society and foundations that will always come to your help and assist you with regard to those court cases. But yes, I personally think the expropriation bill is a good bill. It probably means that Parliament will not carry on with the amendment of the Constitution. It's probably not necessary.
Okay. And the amendment of the Constitution is specifically the worst part, or what do you mean by they won't carry on with it? Is it a good or a bad thing?
No, well, because the expropriation bill is telling us what will happen now. And, the only part was clause 25, to make it. Everybody was telling, I was on that committee as well, traveling through South Africa. Everybody was saying to us, it's already there. You've got the legal means to do what you want to do. The expropriation bill shows us now. It may be challenged, but, I doubt that. But the expropriation bill is telling us now that you can do it. Constitution allows you to do it, and that means there is no reason to change clause 25.
Right. We also had an interview with Tiaan Stoffberg, the former Springbok captain, in one of our most debated topics on one of our podcasts. He talked about the quota system for rugby. And how it's been affecting the players in some sense, that some of the players have this reaction where they don't feel like they're deserving of the role, or they feel like they're constantly being judged because they're simply just a quota player. We have something similar in terms of our socioeconomic scenario with BEE. In terms of where some employees feel like they haven't been chosen because of the best for the role and they're admired for their skills, but rather just to fill some sort of requirement. Tiaan Stoffberg said regarding the quota system in rugby that there was definitely a time where this was necessary, and it's good that it existed. But now it's time for that to change to allow people to be judged on their merit rather than their skin color. What exactly is your opinion on BEE, and does it perhaps go along the same lines, or is it something completely different?
Well, BEE, it is different. It's unfortunately different to sport. It must be different. But BEE, when it was introduced, I think it was really time to allow Black South Africans who were basically outside the white-controlled economy to allow them in. So I think there was definitely a need for that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, BEE should evolve. It cannot be stagnant. It cannot be, always the same. And we have seen some misuses within, BEE. Fronting, that is outlawed now. You cannot do fronting, but fronting was a terrible thing. There's still certain people that will do BEE just for the case to do business with the state, and they will never meet their new shareholders. They will never meet their directors. And BEE cannot only be a transfer of shares or a transfer of money. It must be the transfer of skills. And, if you do that, that is the very way to uplift, your fellow Black South Africans so that they can become powerful and basically on their own become leaders in the field of economy and business. So yes, BEE is with us, and BEE will remain with us for a while, but it doesn't mean that we should look at that, have an open mind on it, and make sure that it brings to Black South Africa what it should, and not only to a few elite.
Right. Yeah. You mentioned going back to COPE specifically. You mentioned that the demise of COPE, where the party was dismantled, was mainly due to a leadership battle. So if that was the reason why COPE dismantled or became rather irrelevant in the political scene, let me rather pose a question in the other way, saying, do you think that it was possible that COPE could have survived if some sort of compromise was organized between the leaders? Do you think that would have been the saving grace, or were there other structural issues that would have caused the party's demise anyhow?
No, well, I think if there was no leadership battle, unfortunately, that battle started before the election when Mvumu Tandale was suddenly introduced by the Shalova camp, as the presidential candidate for COPE. And, you will remember then Musia Lokota, who was basically the face of COPE. He then decided not to join us in parliament in caucus. He made a mistake. And then the battle was there. The battle was there for the first conference that will elect now the new leader of COPE. Shalova was definitely in that race. And, he wrecked that first conference. That conference was ended by a court case. So unfortunately, no. If you have leadership battles, if you're a small party, the ANC can afford leadership battles. They're a big, broad church. They can afford it. They will lose a little bit of votes, but they can afford it. Opposition parties cannot afford it. They cannot afford leadership battles. We've seen it in the DA. We've seen it in the National Party. That was their own demise. And COPE was not different. And it was different because COPE was ANC light. It was the majority. They got lots of other votes from South Africans. But if they could have led COPE, that would have been the new middle ground social democratic movement for South Africa, and could have made a huge difference in the realignment of politics. We failed.
Right. So if you say that COPE was the middle ground of South African politics, specifically within the ANC, which faction do you think will lead or will attain supremacy in this ANC in the coming future? There's opinions that it could be the Magashule faction, which has been, in terms of being reported and public perception, is seen as a very corrupt faction, or it could be the middle ground or the moderate one, which is led by Ramaphosa. If that's a future, has that, that the effort he put in to regain power within the ANC party, has that solidified for the future, or do you think that's also just very much still in the balance?
Well, in politics, anything is not secure, but I think Ramaphosa camp will definitely, win this battle. I think he has gained ground, in the various structures of the ANC. I think he's got the majority support of his caucus, and definitely, his cabinet is supporting him. I think he's got, the fellow South Africans, the rank and file outside is supporting him. So I think Ramaphosa will win eventually. The NPA, if the NPA is starting to do their job, they might just assist him with regard to get rid of the compromised leadership who is in the Makashula himself. Will definitely be, in the target of the NPA. So that is going to be difficult for them, really, to win that battle. They will be, if we wait for the Zondo Commission's report now. My only concern is that the NPA will be overloaded. There's so many things on their table yet coming from Zondo. We've seen the corruption in the COVID PPE, that loaded onto their table. So what I would love to see is President Ramaphosa micromanaging here again, not only appointing a good leader for the NPA, but make sure there's a good enough money, and also, if possible, trying to get, the private sector to assist the NPA more, the legal structures of the private sector, so that we can see an efficient NPA in a way they can do their job, and let's see justice. That's what South Africans wants to see.
And also, you mentioned that Ramaphosa will have to micromanage a lot in order to make a significant progress in reaching his goals and reaching the goals of a lot of the moderate people within the ANC. But micromanaging requires a lot of attention, and I think there's so many things that Ramaphosa needs to give attention to that he can only pick a few that he can actually effectively micromanage. Don't you feel that he should have some support and somebody he can trust with the same type of authority as him? And if so, who would you recommend that person be if you have someone in mind?
Well, his presidency, I think he can use his presidency, to appoint the right consultants to assist him there. That's a possibility. I think, he missed an opportunity. His cabinet for me is too big. He had definitely too many deputy ministers. He should have left them in Parliament to make Parliament a little bit stronger. He should have been maybe a little bit more careful in picking his cabinet, because that becomes vital if he wants to micromanage. Micromanage doesn't mean, you go down and do the job, but at least you call in your ministers, on a very regular basis, and you tell them, I'm not happy with what's going on in Bloemfontein or in Kroonstad or in the rural Northern Cape. I've just been there. What is going on? What can we do? Can we take, can we start working with civil society in those little towns, with the agricultural societies, and not only allow it to our comrades and cadres to run the municipality? Let's convince them to put out a hand and ask for guidance and assistance. Then maybe, there's a possibility that we can make these little towns different.
Right.
Or run.
There's also a sentiment among rural South Africans that aren't necessarily as educated in terms of how politics work, that the cabinet chosen by the president is more a type of a scenario where those that enable him to do what needs to be done, to those that put him in power, gets rewarded with a cabinet position. That obviously alludes to a lot of corruption, and it's something that very much would like to be rooted out within the ANC. But if it's required by anybody in the party to be able to do something that is better for South Africa, this almost feels like a type of I don't want to say a necessary evil, but an evil that they simply have to run with to able to achieve anything. Do you think that there will be a situation where this mentality is broken off, and where the legal system is able to crack down on corruption to a degree that the president will actually be able to do what he needs to do without resorting to these means?
Well, obviously, when you appoint a cabinet, you reward those who assisted you. Right. That is all over the world the same. Yeah. But maybe he could have said, 30% of cabinet, I will look towards, other people. You see, the problem in politics is President Ramaphosa missed the opportunity. His list that he sent to Parliament was probably a hostile list. It was crafted and influenced by the Secretary General. That's why we've seen not so many minorities for the first time ever, on the list being sent back, to represent the African National Congress. So you start there. You make absolutely sure those you send to Parliament will give you an opportunity to pick the best cabinet. I think he missed that opportunity, and then he had to work with what he's got. There are capable people in that cabinet. I think they can do it, but then sometimes the president must knock more on the doors of some of the ministers and say, I want to see better progress.
Right. I mean, you're a self-professed optimist. And in that regard, I'm assuming that if I ask if you believe in the future, or what do you believe in the future that holds for South Africa, you'd hopefully say it's something positive and uplifting for South Africans in terms of what we'd like the country to go towards. But specifically, what perhaps are your predictions for the political scene in South Africa, especially going into the next election, which is only in a couple of years?
Well, obviously the municipal elections is coming up now, if COVID allows to do that. I think it's going to be a difficult election for the ANC, like the previous one. People show their hand easily in municipal elections. Whether other political parties will do better, I'm also in doubt. I really think other political parties is also a little bit in trouble. It's going to be a very interesting municipal elections. Eventually, I think the ANC will still get a majority vote, or more than 50%, but they're going to struggle. It's not going to be easy. Coming up, the next election, if President Ramaphosa can sort out, the camp that is against him, we hear many rumors that they say he will not complete this term. I'm very doubtful about that. I think he's a very crafty, clever personality. He is a good president. There's nobody who can run this country better than him. He can do better, but there's definitely no one better than him at this stage. So my feeling is that he will go into a new election. He will complete his term, and he will probably win that election comfortably. So yes, we're going to stick with the ANC. We can probably, hopefully, stick with President Ramaphosa for another term. That's why it is so important for us who are in a minority to be more positive, to pick what we can do, to pick stuff and put our shoulder and our knowledge towards that so that we can make a difference. And there are many, many issues. There's so many opportunities that my generation never had, that the new generation is having now in Africa, now in the rest of the world. South Africans is making their mark all over the world. In my time, I was not even allowed to travel, or to compete internationally. So yes, there are opportunities, but then you must really start to be more positive. You must not concentrate on negative views all the time. You must forget about this dream to have an independent Western Cape and the dream to have, political power again as a white minority. Forget about that. Work with your fellow South Africans. There's many of them who will work with you and who are not politicians. The majority of South Africans, black or white, are not politicians. They're good, hardworking, loving South Africans.
I mean, you briefly mentioned stuff like the independence movement in the Western Cape. And I think in one of our previous interviews, I mentioned that we have more political parties than colors on a Smartie box type of scenario. It's everybody has some niche that they're trying to create in the form of political party and then get people to vote for. Do you think in terms of specifically voting for not only the municipal elections, but the national elections as well, that the vote will kind of dissipate to hundreds of smaller parties to a point where either the opposition or even the vote in of itself, the majority vote, will be dissipated through a bunch of small ones? Or will people just give up because everybody's simply voting for smaller ones or the ANC, and therefore there isn't really a hope? So we'll see voter participation decline. In terms of a negative perspective, that might be, but just what do you think in terms of how votes will go for the future?
Well, I think sometimes, they always say politicians are only there for their self-interest, but I think voters too. Right. So if you live in a province that are governed well, if you live in a city that are governed well, it's in your interest to make sure that you return those who are governing it. So I think, you've got the inside track if you're in power. And it all depends whether you can really get your voters to queue again and vote for you. That's going to be the challenge for the Democratic Alliance. If they want to win again in Cape Town and, the province, they have to get their voters to queue for them. And they have to convince other people it's in their interest to vote in a good government. That's why I would love to see the ANC running Limpopo better, running the Northern Cape better. It's not only in the interest of the citizens of those provinces, but it's eventually in the interest of that political party too, to make sure that it governs well.
Going on a different tangent entirely, we're very happy to see that you're feeling better again. I heard that you had COVID earlier, I think it was last year, or perhaps this year. But we'd just like to know, in terms of an experience, there's been so conflicting different reports on what having COVID has been like. So some people have a very mild reaction, some people have an incredibly intense reaction. In your specific experience, what was it like having COVID and having to deal with that situation?
Well, probably Petrus, I'm probably lucky to be alive.
Right.
I was dropped, on Christmas Eve, late in the afternoon, struggling to get a hospital bed,
Mm.
and my oxygen in my blood were around 50. It should be above 90
Yeah.
when I was allowed into the hospital. So it was a difficult time. I went straight into ICU for almost 2 weeks. I had a
Mm.
fantastic doctor, and everybody looking after all of us. I said they were like angels, coming down from heaven and doing a very difficult job,
Right.
exposing themselves, to the virus. And that was for me the real South Africa. All races were in where I was lying, and all races were looking after me. That was the real South Africa, working with one goal to make sure that I leave that place a healthy man. And
Mm.
luckily they succeeded. It was a difficult time,
Mm.
and I was eventually for 17 days in. I left on the 18th of January. It was like Christmas and New Year was not meant for me for this year. But
Mm.
it's difficult. If I was unfortunate to get COVID pneumonia, if
Mm.
you get that, it becomes a very serious disease.
Yeah.
And yes, avoid it.
Mm.
Avoid it. Wear your mask. Get, you know, get yourself to do social distancing.
Mm.
Definitely avoid crowds,
Mm.
and make sure that you don't spread it or get it. It is not an easy disease,
Mm.
but the glory must go, to those health workers who work every day, 12 hours a day, to see that we live. That was a fantastic testimony for me.
There's been a couple of examples in history of natural disasters and pandemics and such that really brought the world and the people closer together, made them forget their divisions and so on and so forth, to work together towards a common goal. And I feel like probably in scenarios where emergency workers have been thrust in this position, which is unprecedented, at least for my generation, to say the very least. It's wonderful, and so thankful to have these people. But in terms of the general populace, there's almost always a scenario in which this somewhat gets politicized, especially when government funding and goals are involved. What do you think enables a country or a people specifically to get past their political affiliations and politicizing something like a natural disaster or a pandemic, which has no political orientation by definition? What helps get past that and make people focus on the bigger picture, rather than dividing us, which seems to be happening more and more?
Yeah, well, it happened in America big time.
Exactly. Yeah.
It happened probably in all democracies. Even in the Netherlands, we have seen people reacting to that. I think it's normal. You get fatigue.
Right.
We basically not, animals, and
Yeah.
we want our own freedom sometimes. Yes, I don't think it should politicized. But
Yeah.
if you hand down corruption of COVID PPEs, on a plate to opposition, really, you
Yeah.
will be in serious trouble, to think that you're gonna, escape that. So that
Yeah.
was bad. If
Yeah.
that was terrible of government and of
Yeah.
whoever runs that. It was
Yeah.
terrible of those in those positions, and I hope they catch them all, and I hope they send them to jail, and at least I hope they get some of that 13 billion back.
Yeah.
That was terrible.
Yeah.
While other people are prepared to give their lives, the health workers and in the clinical,
Yeah.
in the clinics of South Africa, then other people were only in this to enrich themselves. Terrible, terrible example.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was not good. It was terrible.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's so fantastic to see that at least people in terms of emergency situations and health workers to be really focused on improving the life for so many people and saving so many lives. It's been absolutely wonderful to talk to you. We appreciate so much taking the time and coming to chat to us. If there's anything else you wanted to lastly add, please, is your chance.
No, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yeah.
I'm outside politics, so I'm a little bit freer to say what I think. But thank you for the opportunity. I still believe in the country, and I think eventually, with your generation doing what you're doing now, and with the older wisdom of the older generation, we just might take hands and make this a great country again.
Thank you so very much. We also want to be optimistic. It feels better to be optimistic. You have more energy, more will to stand up in the morning than constantly thinking about the bad stuff. So in terms of that, I just want to say thank you to you and also to our viewers. If you've made it, thus far in the video, you most definitely have liked it. If this message speaks to you and you want to share this with as many people as possible in order to broaden their worldviews, please, by all means, it helps the channel. It helps perspectives worldwide to change if you share and like this video and so on and so forth. Of course, nothing is for free. It also helps us out a lot in terms of equipment and time and management. And so if you support us financially on the platform Patreon, which is a monthly donation site, everything will go towards building the channel. So once again, thank you so much for watching. This has been WorldView.